I'm Megan Skidmore. For 2.5 years, I have been talking about evolving faith journeys. I started to tire of the heaviness of this focus. I had the clear message come through. It is time for Beyond the Shadow of Doubt podcast to evolve into Living Beyond the Shadow of Doubt podcast. With the same vulnerability and unapologetic authenticity, I will be focusing on the joy in this journey, the life and the living that comes on the other side of maybe, on the other side of what's possible. I want to talk about claiming spiritual sovereignty and becoming your own captain of your vessel. Let's celebrate releasing what no longer aligns for you and connecting with your higher power and honor expanding your energy field to make room for all things new. Welcome, everyone, to today's episode. You know that I am in this transition phase and reimagining it. I'm in this place of let's focus on the joy. Let's talk about the beauty that comes from this messy journey at times, difficult at times, but that is often where the beauty is found, new insights that we wouldn't have learned otherwise. And so today I have Julie Cluff with me to talk about her journey, and I cannot wait. We talked a little bit before I hit record, and I know you're going to love getting to know her just as I have been. So welcome, Julie, to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so thrilled to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. I am thrilled that you are here as well. I want to give our listeners as much time as possible to get to know you. So I will just turn the mic over to you. If you can just start with sharing about your background, your, whatever part you want to include about your family, your upbringing, faith, your education, all of those things that make you you.
Yeah. Well, currently I'm known as a grief coach, and that has been the space that I've been in for a little while. And I'll kind of go back and share what got me there. But I am also reimagining my brand, and I've expanded, and I'm definitely in this spiritual space of helping people to connect to their intuition, to connect to their angels, their spirit guides, to their loved ones that are across the veil. Like that is just, it just fits hand in glove with the grief experience, is to really understand our relationship with the love and support that's there for us on the other side of the veil. I grew up in Florida, and I loved it. I would love to be in Florida still. I live in Nashville, Tennessee now, but I had 3 children with my first husband. We divorced, and then I remarried very quickly after that. And that's been 30 years ago. So I think it took. So I remarried, and we had 3 more children. So we raised our 6 children together, and that was a beautiful experience. I was the oldest of 4, and I grew up in the LDS faith, and that is my background. And I served as a seminary teacher and the president of this and the president of that. And, so I was very, very entrenched in the doctrines of that faith, and that has been a big part of my life. When I wrote my book in 2020 and shared my experiences of loss and rebuilding in my book, Miracles in the Darkness, it was hard for me to see my journey. And my journey was so intertwined with the institution of the church. And now it's like shifted a little bit where, I used to call myself religious, and then I called myself religious and spiritual. And now I'm like, I'm leaning more towards spiritual. I will just say, like, that is such a big part for me, as that personal connection is huge for me, to have that personal connection. And I haven't always felt that, but over the years, I started to see more and more how I was being guided all along the way. And so that's been a beautiful journey.
I look forward to hearing a little more details about all of that. So you started out first as a grief coach,
Hmm.
and you
And
just
I still
care
do
about.
that work. I
Uh-huh.
still, in fact, a big part of what I do is train coaches in grief. And so
Mhm.
that they are, I developed a full program, a workbook, the Hope Model of Healing, and established this whole structure of healing around grief. And one of the things you were saying at the beginning about this idea of focusing on joy, in the five foundations of growth that I teach and that I coach on and that I help people to implement and integrate in their own life, the last one is rebuilding. And in that section of rebuilding, we talk about reconnecting to joy, because when we've experienced loss, when we've experienced grief, sometimes it's like we get so used to being in such a hard space that we forget about our joy. And our joy is integral. It's like a part of our blueprint. It's who we are at the very center of our being. That's part of what I do, is helping people reconnect to their joy. And then another piece that I'd like to kind of introduce is this idea of push and pull energy. So when things are, as humans, like it's natural for us to want to move away from something that's painful, which is actually really a beautiful thing, because it gets us moving to like, oh, I don't want to keep stepping on that bed of nails. Like maybe I should come over here, right? So that's a beautiful piece. But there's also pull energy. And sometimes we kind of naturally move away from the things that are painful, but we have to engage our intention and our attention to engage the pull energy, to look at like, what am I moving towards? What is bringing me joy in my life? How can I bring more of that into my experience? So,
Sounds very similar to concepts that I introduce in my coaching regarding emotions. I'm going through an emotional alchemy certification right now,
oh, that's awesome.
and I'm learning so much. I thought I knew a lot about emotions, but this push and pull energy, I'm learning the tools to help my clients ride their emotions like a wave rather than push against it, because that's just going to be fruitless. It's going to actually increase struggle and increase suffering. But if we ride that and allow that energy to move through it, just like that wave, you're talking about this pull energy, there's more, but we can't skip that middle part.
Yeah.
And we tend to want to.
So important. Yeah, so important.
So if
I
I could
actually,
ask, I
yeah,
just so that our listeners, can you share first brought you to the space of grief? Because I
yeah.
don't know that some of them would know that.
Yeah, absolutely. So my life has been a experiment in grief. I like that's sad to say, but I there were some challenging things growing up. I grew up in a, what we typically call a part member family, which isn't necessarily the pain point, but my
Mhm.
dad struggled with a lot of, as an adult, I can see this looking back, right? He struggled with a lot of trauma. Like there was just so much trauma in his family. And he never knew what to do with that. And consequently, he was very unhappy. And it wasn't anybody's fault. It was just, anybody, like, it wasn't my mom's fault. It wasn't the kid's fault. It was just, this was the experience he had growing up was just super, super painful. And his family, his brother had died by suicide. His dad and his great uncle had all died. And then my brother died by suicide when I was 27. And that was kind of like, that was the big piece of like, I had these challenges in the household with my dad and his, unhealed emotional state. But when my brother died, like that just was like, that just tore my world apart. And I went through so much anguish trying to come to terms with what happened. How could it have been different? And of course, then, you go back to religious teaching, religious training, and so much like this was back in the, late 1980s.
Uh-huh.
And so much of the things that were being taught, they were still kind of transitioning from that place of, they're damned forever to we don't know everything type messaging
I
that.
remember that period of time. Like I remember seeing an article by one of the then leaders, kind of at the top level of the LDS Church, it was an article about those who die by suicide. It wasn't worded in those ways, that way of phrasing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember watching that because I have dealt with depression throughout my life, and that's, I'll say genetic for now. I'm learning there's other elements that come into play
Yeah.
now that I'm learning more about energy. But I remember that. And it was a scary thought that what we were being taught, it was, I was worried about those who had taken their life at their own hands.
Yeah. It was very, very fear-based.
It
And it
was.
was very, very challenging to be in that situation and then feel like, what happened to my brother? Is he okay? He was 23 when he died. He was young. And that was just super challenging. So I went through years of trying to figure out, like, is he okay? Is he okay? Like, and feeling like maybe he wasn't, and then kind of going back and forth. And I will say, very clearly, I know he's okay. I absolutely,
I do too.
positively have no doubt that he's okay. And of course, we wouldn't wish this kind of a loss on anyone, but if you do experience a loss like that, just know that they're okay, that there's just so much love. That is the foundation of who we are and where we came from. And that to me is the most important part of my faith journey, is just recognizing how much love there is all the way across the board. The judgment that we sense from one standpoint is that's not of God. The judgment is us being in
Man-made.
fear.
Mhm. Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
That's
But after
definitely
my
the
brother
model.
died, it was only a couple of years later, when it was, like 2 years later, I found myself in the middle of a divorce from my first husband.
Mhm.
He had gone through some major things, and it just came to a point where the marriage wasn't sustainable, and so we divorced. And like I mentioned earlier, I remarried, and we had three more kids. And so we were raising our six kids together. My former husband had moved out of the country. He wasn't even living near us, and so we were just all one big happy family. And my kids were very young when I divorced and remarried. My youngest son, in fact, my daughter was 6. I had a 6-year-old daughter, 4-year-old daughter, and my youngest was not quite 2 when I remarried. So they were very, very young. And then we had three more children. And I was finally getting into this place with so much, having had experienced so much turmoil. And there's other things, but there always is, right? But I was finally getting into the place after so much turmoil where I was feeling like, okay, I can breathe, things are good. Like we're living comfortably. We're everything felt stable. It felt like all the kind of big things would kind of moved on, and we'd moved past. And then suddenly on Mother's Day in 2007, I was taking my three youngest children on a cross country trip, on a long distance trip to visit grandparents. And on that trip, I fell asleep at the wheel, having never felt tired, which was the most bizarre part of all of it. I never once felt tired that whole drive. And middle of the afternoon, and I suddenly found myself bumping along in the medium of the highway, and the car rolled when I tried to bring it up back up on the highway. And my two youngest children, David, who was 8, and Carrie, who was 10, were thrown from the car. And they died on Mother's Day. They died, that day in that accident. And that obviously turned our whole world upside down. But I will say, and this is kind of hard to understand, and certainly I didn't understand it at the time, but everything I needed to heal from that experience was available to me in the moment that the accident happened. And I know that's really, really hard to understand, and it certainly doesn't mean that I healed immediately. It's just that when we go through hard things, everything we need to bring us back into that space of wholeness, because this is what I now understand. We are whole, and we always have been. We are
Yes,
whole,
that
and
is the definition of perfect. That is the real definition of perfect.
yeah, at our soul level, we are
Yes.
whole always, even when we're in the deepest of deepest challenges. And it took me 3 years to really And I'll just share, well, if it's okay, I'll just share a couple of things that happened at the time of the accident and then kind
Sure.
of how that progressed. But so while the car was rolling, I heard a voice that told me to bring my arm in. It was calm, it was not urgent, but somehow I brought my arm in. And within a couple of months, I was introduced to a story about a woman who lost her arm in a rollover car accident. A family member called me and said, "Oh my gosh, you could have lost your arm," and told me about this woman that had been on TV that had lost her arm. And then a couple years after that, I met another woman who lost her arm in a car accident. There were miracles that were happening even in the moment of the accident. The angels were there, like our guide, my guides were there for whatever reason. And I believe in a soul plan. I believe that we planned our experience here that before we came. And I feel I'm never going to say certain because I don't know if we can ever be truly certain, but I feel deeply in my heart that it was part of my kids' plan to not be here for longer than 8 and 10 years. And so I had to recognize that if they weren't meant to be here for more than 8 and 10 years, then I would choose every day to be their mother versus not being their mother. It was almost like I feel like I was given a choice. You can be their mom for 8 and 10 years, or someone else can be their mom. I mean, that's kind of the way that I see it. I do feel like there was a mission, there was a experience that we planned before we came here as a group, as a family, as a people, as individuals in that group. Yeah, so it was because I had had previous experiences with grief. There was a sense in me that, okay, this is really, really, really bad. Like, this is hard. I can't even express. I had PTSD. I was struggling, struggling, struggling. But there was a part of me that was like, okay, I healed before. Maybe it's possible I could heal again. Maybe it's possible. So there was this little door that was open with a little bit of light. But after a couple of years, I started doing the should thing and I started saying, you should be doing better. Why can't you do that? I started putting so much pressure on myself and so much shame on myself for my experience and how I was responding and how I was showing up and how painful it all was. And I started to spiral down and things got a lot worse before they got better. And at the 3 year mark, right about the time of the anniversary of the accident, I received a priesthood blessing and I had a miraculous turnaround. I walked into that blessing consumed with darkness, and I walked out feeling it lift. And within 24 hours, I felt like I won't say my old self because I will never be my old self. Like, I don't think we're meant to be our old selves. I think we're meant to be always moving forward and progressing. And these experiences, these big experiences that we have, are like openings and portals that break down our foundation and cause us to rebuild. And hopefully, with consciousness, we rebuild a stronger foundation than what we had before. I remember hearing people saying things like, I'm so grateful for my challenges. And I remember thinking, I feel healed from this. Was after the 3 year mark, because before the 3 year mark, I did not feel healed. And there was certainly more healing to do after that point. But I remember thinking, I feel good, but I can't ever imagine being grateful. But there did come a day when I woke up, I had been reading something, and I was like, and I just felt that overwhelming gratitude for my experience. Now, it's not to say that I'm grateful my children died. That would never be the case, right? But I'm so grateful for that experience.
As you're sharing that, a real life example is coming to mind. As you and I are having this interview, the LA fires are
Mm,
still going on. And I share this analogy in no way to diminish the very real pain and loss and devastation that is going on. But you were talking about, you said these experiences that we have, they break down our foundation and they cause us to rebuild. And hopefully, what we rebuild is stronger than what we had before. And I remember reading in one of the many articles that are coming out about this home that was single home standing within its neighborhood. And it's because it had experienced fire before. And when it was rebuilt, it was, I don't know if you can truly make a structure fireproof, but there were
Right.
definitely things put in place. I think it was mostly concrete on the external. And the way the roof was built, it resisted whatever fires do when they're in the throes, like ash falling and catching fire on certain materials and whatnot. And I think even down to the greenery, the foliage around their home.
Wow.
And theirs was mostly untouched,
Yeah.
but it was the only home standing. And so while, yes, what they built, what they rebuilt was stronger than what they had before, and it, for all intent, there's probably still going to be some smoke damage or maybe some
Right.
other things, but they were able to survive that fire. But what's so interesting about this story to me is they still have loss. They're
Yeah.
the only home standing in that neighborhood.
Right.
So, like everything that they knew and understood, and they have their neighbors that, right, their sense of normalcy. I don't even like using that word, but what they knew
Hmm.
is now gone. They'll have their own grief to go through in that respect,
Yeah.
and watching the pain and the sorrow of others. And I, to me, it illustrates, like, that's supposed to be like exactly what you said. These experiences are meant to break down our foundation. They're meant in this position to cause us to rebuild, because
Yeah.
nobody would have done that if forced it. I'm not saying they were supposed to happen. I'm not saying that anything in that nature. To me, I see it as, this is just, it's part of the cycle of life that happens no matter what part of the world you live in. There's things that just happen outside of our control. And
Absolutely. And it goes back to what you said a minute ago. And I heard this quote and I love it. It's like, we can't stop the waves, but we can learn to ride them.
yeah.
And that, I think is just a perfect quote to with what you were saying about like, and that's the thing, right? Because uh, we go through these losses or we go through these experiences as part of life.
Mhm.
There's not a person that has lived on this planet in
Right.
all the centuries that this planet has been around that has not experienced loss.
Yes.
And when we experience loss, we're choosing how we're going to rebuild. And are we going
Exactly.
to rebuild on bitterness, which is certainly part, the grief is part of the healing process. It's not the like we
The
see
end
we see
product.
yeah, we think of it as the problem. Grief is not the problem. It's a part of the process of healing. It's
Yes.
it's the part of that, processing that we have to do to move
Yeah.
forward. But if we look at it from a spiritual aspect, what am I going to so I'll give you an example. When the accident happened and my kids died, they were young. And there were moments where I had thoughts like, I'm being punished because I was driving on a Sunday. I mean, that is
Um,
crazy to me now that I even entertained that thought. That makes no sense. I had, I worried about my brother. I mentioned that before for a long time, but I even worried about my kids. Like, are they really okay? Did we teach them well? Did we do this? Did we do that? And it's just we have those, and this is my perspective now, others may not agree with me, but my perspective now is that it is all love. We don't have to worry about anybody who has moved on from this life to the next. God loves all of us. There is complete love and acceptance of all of us in our experience. And I heard it described this way once, and I actually just love it, is that it's like we're actors on a stage, and we all go on the stage and one person's playing the villain and one person's the victim, and then they get off the stage and they go out to dinner together. It's like, because we're this space that we're in right now is like it's like a learning lab. And we're here having these experiences to learn and grow. And I have been a student of near death experiences for a number of years. I've read, I don't even know how many, lots. And it doesn't all, it's not like every near death experience resonates with me, but a lot of them do. And the very, very common experience is to hear people talk about how much love there is on the other side. In fact, talking about podcasts and reimagining, I had a podcast for 4 years that I did called Build a Life After Loss. And I have 170 plus episodes on there about grief and rebuilding and so forth. I just recently launched a new podcast called Light the Day, and I am interviewing spiritually people who have had spiritually transformative experiences.
Mhm.
And I've interviewed a couple of people who have had near death experiences, including this one woman who is remarkable, who grew up a drug addict. Her parents were
Mhm.
drug addicts. They were, she basically said, I was a con artist, I was a drug addict. And then she died of an overdose and came back and has completely turned her life around. Like it's unrecognizable now. So it's and that's a common experience with people who have had near death experiences is they get a taste of that overwhelming love, that divine love, and they come back. It's just different people because they're like, wait a second, you know, because she was an atheist before this happened. She had no belief in God or any of that. So yeah, I just think there's just so much more love than we recognize. I had an experience a few months ago where I was on a long plane flight, and when I went to go sit down, the man that was sitting next to me, he was probably like 40-ish. The man sitting next to me immediately introduced himself and started chatting with me, and we had like a 3-hour flight, and we talked all the way from Nashville to our destination. And he was somebody who had suffered with drug addiction and a lot of problems and had found a Christian church and had found Christ and had rebuilt his life. But it was so fascinating because his, we had a beautiful conversation. I wish I had a recording of it because it was a lot of fun. But we didn't talk about religion, but we talked the Bible. Like we talked the Bible up one side and down the other, and we were talking about different stories and different parables and all of this. And his thing, because of where he was in his journey, a lot of his framing was the bad people need to be punished and the good people are rewarded. Like there was just like this very stark, yeah, like
Yeah.
it divides people.
Yeah.
And so he was like kind of like, what about punishment? And I'm like, what about love? You know?
Yeah.
and and
I
and I have experienced that myself, in the past where I've felt that way. So I could see kind of the progression of faith.
I too would love to hear a recording of that conversation that you had. That's one of the things that I just hold so dear to my heart in this journey is the fantastic conversations, the heart-to-heart conversations that you're able to have when your heart is broken right open and
Yeah.
you're able to connect with others who, for whatever reason, maybe their heart has been broken open. I want to explore something with you. You talked about sometimes these experiences, maybe we'll feel bitter about them. And I'm learning through emotional that the difference between feeling something like bitterness, for instance, about the loss, staying there in that place, or choosing to be the observer or learning from it, allowing that emotion, as hard as it is, and then using that energy or riding that wave to the shore, allow that pull energy that you're talking about. That is where the teaching can happen. That's where the learning is available to us if we can ride that wave until it dissipates at the shore or crashes, whatever you want to say. I've learned we cause additional suffering and pain when we resist that pull, when
100%.
we try to ignore it, or when we stay in that place of bitterness or whatever. And I love how you
Or we
call,
judge it.
yes, all of those things. Life
Yeah.
is a learning lab, you said. So how can you share with us in your personal journey, like what are some of the tools maybe or the processes that have helped you move through and face these struggles? And I don't believe it's a one and done thing, right? It's not
Yeah.
learning, it's ongoing. So maybe you're still using some of these. Can you speak to that?
Yeah.
As part of my commitment to giving back, every first Friday of the month, I offer a free coaching hour. Anyone is welcome to join. This is an opportunity to get introduced to my style of holistic coaching and what it would be like to work with me. Gain real skills, insight relevant to you, and fresh perspective. For those attending, there will be opportunities for a complimentary one-off energy alignment session. To get the link, register at the link in the show notes.
Yeah, and we can feel I'll use the word complete in one experience in our life. Like it no longer carries the triggers that it once did. And I always say triggers are just evidence that there's more healing to do. That's all it is. That's all it is. And so when we feel triggered by somebody or something, it's like it's showing us a pain point that we can explore. Like I just had, an appointment with a client this morning, and we were exploring an area where she felt triggered, and we found all these areas where she needed to shift her thinking and her thought processes about,
Mhm.
and even her actions around what she was doing in those areas. And that, but it's like I told her, it's not that you're not going to be triggered from this anymore. Like there's still more work to do. It's just that you've uncovered some things. And so when we feel triggered, it's just recognizing that, oh, that's just a space that needs some attention. It's like the nagging toddler that's like, Mom, Mom, Mom. I had an experience this week where, and it happens to me less and less now, like when you're in this work, it's like you start to gain more understanding of yourself, and you have less judgment of yourself, and when you have less judgment of yourself, you have less judgment of others. But I had an experience this week where I got triggered by a conversation with my husband. I'm like, oh man, what's going on here? So I think it's like you said, it's rather than running away from those things, it's like, oh, what happened here? Like it's being curious. And one of my favorite formats for that is what happened, what went wrong, kind of thing. Like, I could journal and say, okay, this is what happened. My husband said this and I said this, and then I felt I felt my energy, I felt my emotions rising. And what why did it happen? Like, just observing, was there something underneath this that caused this, for me to feel triggered? And what do I want to do differently next time? How do I want to? So it's really self-compassion, like developing self-compassion is a huge part of it. We tend to be so compassionate of others and sometimes not as compassionate for ourselves. And honestly, when we're not compassionate with ourselves, that kind of leaks out onto others too, especially the people close to us. So yeah, and and when we're going through when you're going through really painful things that are so painful that you wake up in the morning and that's the first thing you think about, and it's the last thing you think about when you go to sleep. It's finding those little moments. It's allowing the emotions to come and not judge them, but it's also finding those little moments and even creating those little moments in your day where you can find some relief and peace. Like after my kids died, one of the things that I did regularly was I played tennis. I had started playing tennis before they passed away and in the neighborhood. And as soon as I was physically able to, I got back out there on the tennis court. And I got out there on the tennis court and I'm physically active. So I'm like moving my energy. I'm not staying stagnant. I'm moving my energy, which is always helpful. Anything good for the body is good for the, spirit, is good for the soul. And I was paying attention to that dumb little yellow ball. And I wasn't thinking about all my other problems. I could just go out there and just focus on that little yellow ball.
Yeah.
It gave me an oasis. It gave me a space where I wasn't the mom who had lost two children. I was just another tennis player out on the court. So finding those spaces where you can enjoy yourself, because chances are you're not going to be enthusiastic about the things that you were enthusiastic about before, and that's okay. but finding those little spots where you can find some enjoyment in life and allowing that and not feeling guilty about bringing some pleasure into your life.
I resonate with that a lot, Julie. I have actively tried to cultivate those types of moments, those experiences in my day or week as well. I think one thing about my journey that I have really learned is to focus more on the present moment. And you don't have to worry about the weight of the world in every single moment of the day. It includes for you the grief that you're experiencing, the loss of what you used to know. Those moments of joy are crucial to reinvigorating our spirits in some way, feeling that love, that relief. You said that relief. And sometimes we don't give ourselves permission to do that, especially when you have been raised to have so much focus on, for me, a lot of, I didn't know it until I saw it and could not unsee it, but my focus was a lot on the hereafter, which
Mm.
a bad thing per se, right? I love how you've shared how you've learned more about that connection with those who have already passed through, you said the veil, some people might call it, through this life, this mortal existence, however you term it, is being able uh, to see the joy that is in the here and the now and allow yourself to experience that without, or you may not have complete without grief or without even guilt, maybe, but learning how to navigate. You can feel this or experience this in one hand, and you can feel this in the other hand and experience this in the other hand.
So, because at the soul level, at the spirit level, we are love, we are joy, we are peace, and learning to drop into that divine center and in the moment, and just when one of the things I learned a few years ago that was so impactful to me, which I had never, and I'm sure this is like. I'm sure if you're listening to this, you're like, how come you didn't know about that? But one of the things that was so impactful to me was just learning to take a deep breath. It was like 10 years ago or something when somebody taught me that, like, just take a few deep breaths and recenter yourself. And I was like amazed
Yeah.
at the difference that makes. And I was practicing it. I was working at our family business, running our family business at the time. And I would have somebody call who was like, I not very kind, let's just say. And I would, I felt, ooh, like, it just kind of puts you in fight and flight and all that, right? And I
Yeah.
would get off the phone and I would just breathe deeply. And I was like, I'm fine. I'm okay. Like, for someone who dealt with PTSD, I know what it's like when our system is caught in the old story. And that's basically what's happening with PTSD is that our body thinks that we're still, in my case, still rolling in that car, right? We get
Yeah.
stuck in an old pattern, but when we feel anxious or and again, like I went through therapy, EMDR, and all that to clear that part of what I was experiencing. And I certainly recommend that to anybody that's experiencing this at a clinical level. But just our kind of day-to-day anxiousness, over time, I learned that there's nothing to be anxious about in this moment. I'm okay.
Yeah.
It's really easy because we hear about the fires here and we hear about this happening over here, and it becomes overwhelming, especially for women. We are empathic. We want everybody to be okay. And so it's really, really challenging for us to stay in our feminine heart and not feel hurt by the hurt that's happening around us. But if we check in with ourselves, we can go, I'm okay. I'm at peace right here, right now, in this moment. I am sitting in a heated room with, my chair is secure. There's no threats in my space. And so when we start feeling anxious, we can go back to that present moment and really connect to the divine center of who we are, because at our divine center is peace and love and joy. That's what resides right there in our divine center. And it's always there accessible for us. And that divine center connects us to all the amazing support we have on the other side. Like we are never alone. We have angels and spirit guides and even our loved ones who are always aware of us. And I know in a traditional, in the religion I grew up with, there was often talk about how like if you're not doing the right thing, then the spirit leaves, which kind of implies that you're alone. But what I've come to learn is that we are never alone, that we might choose things that separate us from feeling that we have that support. Because certainly I remember I had a therapist who was really in tune. And I remember her one day kind of saying, and I don't know if I can even make sense of this story, but I could remember being in her office and I was doing so poorly. Like I was really, really tanking because I had so much judgment against myself, and I was heaping so much pain on top of my pain. And I remember her saying, "Can you feel that support that's in the room?" It was almost like she was pointing at this spirit help that was there. It was almost like she was sensing my children. Like I've connected with my children. My son has said it was really hard to see you in so much pain, but I was there. They're here, they're helping us. And that brings me so much joy to just know that I am not alone, that I am always loved and supported, and that is the center of who I am. And that's the center of who you are. And that's the center of who everybody is. It's
Yes.
just some of us recognize it more than others. And the more that we recognize it and we integrate that piece into our life, it's not about being perfect. It's not about making perfect choices. We can let go of all of that. I've let go of all of that. And I just
Mhm.
look at it, it's all experiment. I'm going to try this today and we'll just see how it goes. And I may decide that, oh, that maybe wasn't the right way. That didn't feel correct after all for me to choose to talk to that person this way or whatever. And it's just an experiment.
You said that just how transforming it was for you to be able to pause and just learn the power of breath work and be able to, realize in the moment, there's nothing for me to be anxious about in this moment. I am okay. And as you were sharing, I had so much gratitude come up. The life changing skill that comes with thought work, and I'll add feelings work, being able to separate oneself from them, from the anxiety or from the situation, that we are not our thoughts and our feelings. They are not facts.
Yeah.
Unless you can do that, and then by extension, consciously choose to slow down from this rat race of life, to purposely choose to step off this hamster wheel, your status quo is going to change and you're not going to be able to see yourself as separate from these things. And you're going to keep yourself ultimately from experiencing these moments. You've talked about joy, and I have experienced those too, but there's also moments of just bliss.
Yeah.
And if you're not able to do that and separate yourself, you're just going to continue to see this as this is just the quote unquote the way things are. So for me, I've learned that looking for, seeking, being curious, being open, that I'm able to find these moments of bliss. That's for me been increased self-differentiation from everyone, everything, every organization around me, that I
Yeah.
am my own sovereign soul. That's one of the areas. But I want to hear from you. Like, you've shared a lot of things already that have brought you joy. Can you share what comes to mind for you when I talk about this? What are of bliss?
Well, when you talked about bliss, I remembered an experience I had 2 years ago, and it's kind of a bigger experience. And so, and I would just preface it with we can find these moments in the everyday of life. One of the things I really enjoy doing, this is so silly, but I really enjoy chopping vegetables. I'm like it's so grounding to me to like it's so satisfying. I've learned
Love
knife
that.
skills, and I'm like I can chop them. Yeah, you're not going to see me on any chef show anytime soon. But it's just grounding, and it's just joyful, and it's just this space where I'm just like it's just me and the vegetables. It's just me and the fruit, right? But when you talked about bliss, So 2 years ago, I was on my first whale watching trip ever. Like I'd never been on a whale watching trip. My daughter had been on a couple of them and she shared her videos and talked about how fun it was and so forth. But this particular trip, we'd gotten out to the pier and it was kind of, it was afternoon. For some reason, things they were moving really slowly. It was taking a long time to get us on the boat. It was kind of an excursion type thing. And frankly, I was kind of grumpy by the time we got on the boat.
Mhm.
and and then we got out on the boat, and this was in, off the coast of Mexico in Cabo. And we got on the boat and we get on this boat and it's like an oversized raft. So again, I'm like grumpy. I'm like, oh my gosh, seriously, what are we doing on this dumb raft? It was uncomfortable. It was like not the boat that I was expecting, right? So we get out in the water and we're out there for probably an hour and we're not seeing anything. There was like one tail that went off way off in the distance. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be a dud. Like we're not going to see anything. I was expecting to see whales. And I heard, Julie, you have angels.
Oh,
When I heard that, my whole being just like lifted in light. And I thought, I have angels. And I started saying to myself over and over again in my mind, thank you, angels, for bringing the whales close to the boat. Thank you for bringing the boat close to the whales. And within 10 minutes, we were surrounded. We were surrounded. We had whales to the right of us. We had whales to the left of us. We had whales in front of us. We even had a whole pod of dolphins that went swimming by. They were doing, I mean, it was a show. And, I'm from Florida, so I've done SeaWorld, but this was a show like I've never seen before. I was so filled with bliss, with just like this awe. It was incredible. I wish that I could transfer that feeling to everybody because it was so beautiful. And I was so grateful, and when the whales came up and in my mind again, I'm just like, thank you, angels, for bringing the whales close to the boat. Thank you for bringing us to the whales. And at the very end, our guide was saying, yeah, we got to get going because we're just sitting here just absorbed in all this activity. And he's like, we got to get back to the shore. And right about that time, they all started to dissipate, kind of move on their way. And this one whale came up and you've probably seen this before where they put their tail up in the air and they start slapping the water and it looks like they're waving. It looks like they're waving to you. And this one whale just waved to us several times.
what?
Yes. And our guide was like, "You guys have good energy. This is so great. You guys have good energy." And I'm like, "Yes, thank you, angels." It
Oh
was
my
so
gosh.
beautiful.
That is
And
breathtaking.
it was so incredible. I was so in the moment. I didn't even pull out my phone to take a picture, a video. I think my husband got a little bit of video, a little bit of picture here and there, but I was just completely absorbed in the moment. And it was the next day that I heard start teaching about angels. And so when I came home from that trip, I started teaching about angels and I started sharing angel messages. I share them on Instagram. I share angel messages that I receive. And it is it's just remarkable. And I think, the more that we can tap into that, and it's just the little things. I think a lot of times people will say to me, I saw this heart and I thought about my, husband who had passed, or I thought about, do you think that they are there? And I was like, yes. Anytime that our thoughts are drawn to somebody that we've lost or somebody that's on the other side, anytime our thoughts are drawn to them, we can know that their presence is there, that they're there and just be in that bliss of experiencing them. And one of the things that for me that's impactful, and this is one of the ways they got my attention early on, was with the number 12, because that's the date. The day I was born was the 12th of the month. All of a sudden I was seeing 12s everywhere. And I'm like, this is really unusual because I'm kind of a skeptic. Like it doesn't sound like it, but it's taken me a while to get to this place. And I was just seeing 12s everywhere. And I later learned that it was my daughter who was sending me 12s. She was trying to get my attention to notice that they were communicating with me and later even communicating with my son and my daughter. They both have expressed to me at different times that they were there that day that the whales came to the boat, that they were there, that they participated in that, bringing the whales close to the boat. And I know this can kind of sound out there, and I get it because I was the same way. I've thought the same things.
Actually, it doesn't sound out there to me. It actually sounds very much in line with some of the things that I've been learning and experiencing.
That's awesome.
And I was having a conversation with some family members recently, and I was able to say, it's like, we both grew up in the LDS faith, and we were taught how our spirits are housed by our physical bodies in this earth life, right? Something that we hadn't experienced before. And then, when we pass on from this mortal life, they separate. And I've had coaches share, and this resonates with me so much that, it's more like it's not really our spirits being housed by our bodies. It's like our bodies are maybe covering a portion of our spiritual presence, our spiritual being, our essence,
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it. And I said, it's like, it's not that me taught is wrong or incorrect. It's more like maybe that was a grade school level of
Yeah, it's
explanation
expanded.
or understanding, right?
Mhm.
Whereas I feel like now I'm in graduate school or I'm getting a PhD about all of this. And you're so right. This is a huge, gigantic learning lab, and I am a sponge and I am
Yeah.
absorbing it all, and I can't get enough.
Yeah. 100%. I feel
So,
the same way, so much the same way. It is like and it's a beautiful world when we allow ourselves to look at it and to see it with that light. And one of the things I'm just really grateful in my own spiritual journey is that and I'm not perfect at this, but it's something I'm really, really focused on is letting go of all the judgment, letting go of all the judgment of everybody and everything, and this idea that we all should be doing certain things in this a certain way. And uh, like you said, that's kind of kindergarten level, and we can kind of get stuck in what I call pharisaical mindset, where it's
yeah,
all about the rules and
right, right.
learning the
Which,
rules. And
which brings in all this policing of everybody around us,
yep,
blaming, pointing fingers.
yep.
Uh, like the love gets lost, at least in my experience or in my understanding, my learning, as I've expanded in my view and in my own personal experience.
Yeah, 100%. And if we look
Right.
at, Jesus came, and what was his message? His message was, let's get rid of all the rules and
Yeah.
learn to love each other and learn to live in, and I look at, so I'll just mention a couple of things. Like I look at like the woman who was found in adultery, right? And what did he say to her? He said, go and sin no more, and as I looked at the word sin, the sin means missing the mark. It just means that like we've forgotten who we are,
Mhm.
and we're choosing things that are not aligned with the being that we are, the being of love that we are. I feel this when I get snappy with my husband. I'm like, "Oh, I've forgotten who I am. Like this is not who I am." Like, but I'm not it's not from this place of, "Oh, you terrible person." It's just like, "Oh, let's realign." And so he said to her,
Exactly.
go and sin no more. This doesn't feel good. That the life that you're living isn't resonant with your soul. Go and live the life that's resonant with your soul.
That is so gorgeously said. That is just awesome. I love that so, so much, Julie. That's
Yeah.
perfectly said.
And another one that if we look at the prodigal son, like we call it the prodigal son. And I had a friend who shared with me, and I don't, she's of a different faith, and I don't remember where she was taking this class, but she says, I'm taking this class, and I don't remember if she said it was like the Hebrew. I don't remember, but from a different cultural perspective, instead of calling it the parable of the prodigal son, it was called the parable of the running father. And I cannot even say that without crying because it's the father that goes running for his son. It's not the prodigal son. Like he was living unaligned with his soul, and he returned, and the father went running. And I just love that perspective so much more. If we focus on one of the things that, as I teach about angels, one of the things I've learned and one of the things that I teach is that we tend to look at, and this is the way I looked at it, and that's why I say that, but we tend to look at, like, we get worried about, oh, there's angels, like they're all judging us. They're all sitting around with clipboards going, oh, what did she do? Oh, nope, yeah, oh, yep, and they're having
I
a
think they're
conference.
confusing that with, Santa's elves. They're the ones.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And they're having a conference at night going, okay, what are we going to do about this problem and this problem? No, it could not be further from the truth. They are loving us. They are grateful for us. They recognize the challenges that we're having. So it's looking at the angels as like, nope, nope, nope. Looking at it that way, it's kind of like if we recognize that we're more like toddlers to this angelic
Uh-huh.
realm, we're like toddlers.
Yeah.
Like, look, she took a step. Yay.
That's
Can we
so
help her take another step?
great.
How can we
Yeah.
support her in taking another step? It's so beautiful. Oh, look, she's sitting down and she's crying because she fell when she took a step. Oh, how can we comfort her? How can we love her? That's the energy they bring. It's not judgment. It's just pure love. They can do nothing else because it is their nature and it is our nature. And so when you're talking about joy and bliss and that peace and all of that, that is truly connecting us to who we really are at that soul level. And when we connect to who we really are at our soul level, that is the divine spark that connects us to all of
Yes.
that spiritual help that we have
Oh my gosh.
around us all the
So
time.
powerful. I can feel the energy throughout my entire body. This is such an amazing conversation.
I love it so much because
Yeah.
the pain that we have in this world is because we've forgotten who we are. Like, we're powerful beings. We
Mhm.
are, every one of us, powerful beings.
Yes.
Every one of us, even the ones that we look at and go, oh my gosh, what are they doing? What are they thinking?
Yeah. So the last question I have for you, Julie, I like to ask, what does living beyond the shadow of doubt mean to you now, real
What
time?
it means to me now is in those moments when I forget, because I do. Like,
Mhm.
I'll go days and I'm like, oh my gosh, I haven't recentered myself. I haven't meditated. I haven't connected with myself. In those moments, that brings me back into that space. Even having this conversation with you
Yes.
strengthens again my connection, my
Yes.
love of this connection that we have with the spirit realm. But remembering that we're human and we're meant to live here and have experiences here. We're meant to go play tennis and chop vegetables
And eat our
and
vegetables.
eat our vegetables. I like chopping them more than eating them, but that's another story.
Awesome. Well, I want to make sure, and I'll leave whatever is the easiest way for folks to connect with you in the show notes, whether it's a social media account or your email. But this is the true wrapping up. I like to throw out some questions that are for fun
Yeah.
and help our guests get to know you, just the human Julie. Tell us your favorite book or favorite book. There's so many.
Yeah, a favorite book. I read a ton, but I will say that kind of over many years, my favorite book has been To Kill a Mockingbird. It was such a shift in my own, I don't know, it's just a beautiful story of love and compassion
It is.
and challenge, huge
Yes.
challenge.
Are
Yeah.
you an introvert or an extrovert or in
I
between?
I think I'm an ambivert. I'm in between, but I do have a lot of introverted qualities and I do have a lot of extroverted qualities, but I tend toward the introverted side.
And who is your favorite artist?
Oh, that's a hard one. Well, this beautiful painting that's behind me, a friend of mine painted, and it's
Gorgeous.
gorgeous on video, but it is even more gorgeous in person because it has so much texture and stuff. So I
Oh, I
I
love that.
love original art. I paint myself and I love original art when I can find some that,
Me too.
yeah.
That's awesome. Are you a night owl or a morning lark?
I'm kind of neither right now, but I'm very much a morning person. Like, I was the kid that would get up at 7 o'clock in the morning on Saturdays as a teenager, which is just weird. But I definitely get things
Love it.
done better in the morning.
I love it. And who is your celebrity crush?
I have to say, I don't know that I have one.
And that's okay
Is
too.
that weird? But I really don't
Oh,
know if I have one.
That's just perfect. Do you do still or carbonated water, or are you a diet soda
Just
fan?
regular water.
Other
I'm
beverage?
a plain water
Yeah.
girl, although I do have a little bit of electrolytes in my water.
And then finally, tell us the furthest place that you've traveled.
Oh, Australia. And I can tell you from Nashville, that is a long flight, but it's worth it.
Yes. I've made it to New Zealand, not to Australia yet.
Oh, fun.
Maybe
Yeah.
one day. Julie, it has been my honor. I feel privileged to have this conversation with you and get to know you a little more and to share you with the listeners of this podcast. You have many gifts. Thank you for sharing them and for shining your light.
Thank you. I so appreciate being here. So thankful for your invitation and the beautiful work that you're doing here. Thank you.
Writer, teacher, author, Mormon scholar, and founder of Dialogue Journal, Eugene England said, "My faith encourages my curiosity and awe. It thrusts me out into relationship with all creation and encourages me to enter into dialogue." As a proud member of the Dialogue Podcast Network, my hope is that Living Beyond the Shadow of Doubt podcast is an extension of that vision. Visit meganskidmorecoaching.com to find this podcast and additional free resources, including the link for a complimentary coaching session. Follow me on Facebook or Instagram for more, or to send me a DM. Help the podcast grow. Please follow, review, and share with a friend.